Hello. My name is Britt. I am a member of Homebaked, and Homebaked is a group of residents and stakeholders in Anfield in Liverpool. And we are co-developing, or like we like to name it, co-producing a model of community-led and people-centered regeneration of parts of our high street. I am delighted to be here because I think it's always such a privilege to be able to come from where we work on the ground to a place where, together with your help, for example, we start thinking and disseminating what it is that we do. I also feel particularly privileged as a speaker today because everybody laid the ground so wonderfully. Even Marianne explaining housing market renewal, which normally takes me like most of the talk because it makes me so angry, that I might be able today to concentrate on some things that I think are very particular to what we do at Homebaked. And I think particularly for me, I guess the question that was raised by Alistair about citizen-led development, if you think about a neighborhood where you have a very homogeneous group of people, and maybe also a lot of people that do not consider themselves activists or do not have got certain professional backgrounds or educational backgrounds that automatically leads them to starting a movement or even thinking that they are the people that could. So I guess what for me is a very important question always to ask is like, how do we create the conditions that allow people to come on that journey and very different people to sit around a table. So neighbors, people that are stakeholders, people that are very different to each other and of very different opinions and are definitely not friends in any way. This is where we are. So we are in North Liverpool. We are opposite. We are in a small bakery. We are a community lunch trust, and we are a cooperative bakery at the moment. We become more and more things, but that's what we are at the moment. And we are just opposite the Liverpool football ground. So we are in an area that, even though it's classified as the most deprived in the country, one of the most deprived in the country, is also one of the biggest tourist attractions in Liverpool, just after the Beatles. We have 60,000 people coming down our main streets for every match. We have tourists coming into the area, and so on. This club is in what's, still brands itself as a neighborhood club. It was one day, so we have old stories of our members where, the players still lived in digs in their houses. That is not the case anymore. They now come in limousines and arrive, through the back door. But the club is owned now by the same people that own the Boston Red Sox. And what that over the years has done to our high street is that it is more viable to open shops on that high street only for match days as a takeaway. So for over a long time, that high street has demised into hardly having any local provision. And there isn't really a healthy together between that big business and the local community. Also, and now I don't have to explain this, this area was earmarked for the Housing Market Renewal Initiative in 2002. All what Marianne explained happened in that area and led to entire streets looking like that, led to people living in between boarded up houses, led to accidental fires in certain houses, led to what I would call a systemic displacement of people because they are not the right owners, buyers, potential investors. It also meant that, this is what a generation of people, because as Marianne explained, these programs take a lot longer than you think they will, and they leave an area for an entire generation to live in these kind of conditions, or in these kind of conditions. And I think what happened particularly in our area, and I'm sure in other areas, in order to become part of a program like that, you have to tick all the deprivation boxes there are. So people are constantly being told over a long time they're deprived. You know, you're deprived, you need whatever, whatever, whatever. I mean, it's a lot more complex than that, but what I'm trying to get at is a very particular situation that people find themselves in, that one of our members would have described as sick of waiting. So physically sick of waiting, consulted to death and sick of waiting. So, you know, people went through a long process of like pretend consultations where they could choose, would this street go or that street go? They were never really questions about taking ownership over change. Change just happens at you, to you. And particularly for people who owned their houses, they, you know, would have had to sell their houses at a price that they couldn't buy a new one for example. So that is a complete displacement of people into even other areas and so on. So what also happened during that time, it's actually quite hard for me to explain this without explaining housing market renewal. Are you following? Did you follow enough of Marianne's? Yeah, okay. So what also happened throughout that time was that a lot of the value within the area was sold out of the area. So you would have, you know, just very normal processes like demolition means that the bricks that were there for in the old houses, they are being, as part of the process, sold out of the neighborhood too, for example, Japan or somewhere, to build nice chimney breasts, things like that. That's part of a system that things are being sold out to a different area. I guess what I'm trying to say with this is that all of these systems look at what are we missing here in this area, what's not here, and how can we bring that in. You know, selling out what has been there, which was, you know, a lot of value within a functioning community. And just to say that our community is still, you know, has still been one of those communities that actually were people like Mary just down the road, for example. So you have entire families that are in that kind of neighborhood setup that are being displaced. So just very quickly, in 2002, this was introduced. In 2008, the whole housing bubble collapsed. And by that point, you know, only half of the new houses that should have been built had been built. And the whole scheme that wasn't very functioning in the first place completely stagnated. And then in 2010, the entire scheme was pulled. So we found ourselves in a situation where for quite a while, the council didn't have any new solutions for this area. And in this particular time, there was an artist that was commissioned by the Liverpool Biennial. Her name is Jana van Heeswijk. She came into the area and she started a process within that area where she just very simply invited people into, young people into a process of design. So answering to the question, what does it mean to live well? And going through a whole process of learning how to design, thinking about how can we retrofit these kind of houses that we have here, and how can these still become something that we can work with, or how can we design particularly for people here, so they took people from the community as their client to do so. And as part of that, they always looked at, you know, how can we maybe create a model together that both addresses the question of business and the questions of local jobs, and the question of people wanting to finding work where they live, and the question of it becoming a high street that can maybe be viable again in some way, and how can we also provide good quality housing with that is maybe long-term affordable. And they took over a local bakery that had closed down in the process. It's an iconic building in our neighborhood. It's our local neighborhood bakery that was one of the last businesses that closed down throughout this process. This is Mrs. Mitchell, who used to own the bakery until very recently, and who closed down because their business was just like any other business on our high street, under demarcation, ready for demolishment, and then completely stagnated, so just under demarcation. So you can't sell. You can't, in a way, you can rent out, but you can't sell the building. You can't do anything with it. They were waiting for the council to be built out. We took that moment as a small group that had started from the seed of just the design workshops to take over the building, to just show one real-life example of how you could work with a bakery and shops on the top, maybe a couple of houses next to it. And in a process of learning and working together, this is actually Marianne working with young people on this process. We developed this beginning of an alternative, and very much making real life choices in the space, going like, how can we, for example, show that there will be people working in the kitchen? So let's open the wall and let's show that this is a producing business. It's not just a takeaway. It's not just somebody coming in. Sorry, I am going to speed it up a bit. And while we were doing that, people were starting to become quite impatient. And they came in and they started to say, when are we going to start being able to buy bread again? So there's a real urgency here, right? Like, actually, we want this to function as a shop on our high street. So we came together and we decided very quickly, and we, decided how can we do this? We're like 2 people and a dog at that time, and we said, okay, let's start baking. Let's start baking. Let's start opening on match day. Let's just do it. While we do that, we write a business plan. So we do it. We plan on the ground, on hand. We just make it happen. And while we do that, what for us has always been incredibly important is we try and tell the story. So through the Liverpool Biennial 2012, we invited people on a small minibus. We took them on a tour, and we asked people, our neighbors, other people from the community, to tell their story, to actually tell what it feels like when that happens to you. Because we can get to a point where, of course, if you're not able to talk about it, if everybody always talks about you as deprived, could you talk about your neighborhood as something you are proud of, your house? So here is like Sue, who allowed 400 people to come through her living room to tell that story of her house and how much she loves it. And, I'm just flipping through because we haven't got a lot of time. We told the story in many different ways, some ways that also bring in finance, of course, And then we got to a point, and I think for me that is the most important point in the story of Homebaked, is we got to a point where we were ready to open the bakery as a business, and we had a team of staff, and we had people ready to go, and we had a growing group of people that had started to regather hope, because hope, if you're sick of waiting, and if it's been so long time that you don't believe something could happen, hope only sort of develops over time. And so we had just come to a point where people started to believe that this might be possible, when the council turned around and said, how we said we might not demolish these houses? Well, we will, because we're going to make plan for a bigger master plan, and there's going to be development of your area, and the bakery is one of them. And in that moment, we sat around a table, and this is people who in the beginning came into the door and were like, this is never going to work, and I don't know, this, like, we're all people that were angry or people that were stuck in a loop of anger. And they sat around the table and they said, let's take the risk. We have a small amount of arts funding. It was an arts prize that we won. Let's invest that now into the bakery, because we can't invest the 100,000 that we had from Social Investment Bank grant, because this is not a secure building, and we just make it happen. We open. And we just open as a business because we need to manifest what it is that we're doing right here, right now. And we did. And I'm just going to go quickly through it. It's open as a business and running since 3 years. It's been an incredibly difficult journey to go through. We offer local jobs, local training. We had many times where we nearly folded, but we are now making profit 3 years later. We also have been miraculously taken out of the demarcation zone in negotiations with the council. So the bakery is the one building on our street that's staying, actually, in community ownership. And we then, from that point, this is the bakery as a meeting point for people, more and more people to come together, because participation is all kinds of things. Buying bread is participation. Making big-time decisions is participation. Volunteering as a baker is participation. And working as a baker is participation. And we are now developing a whole high street scheme on the land next to us where we weren't able to save the houses because we didn't have any strategic power over them. So they will be demolished. But we said, okay, we invest and we build, and we'll make an entire scheme from that particular model. Because, of course, on our particular stretch, you know, we actually can make it possible to make local business work as a model where we cross-funded with tourist trade, with tourist trade and with match day trade. So we're extending that model, and with that we're building housing because, of course, we all deserve quality housing on a high street, and we want to live where, you know, be able to live affordably, long-term affordably where we work. And I guess what for us is the thing that now becomes really interesting, you know, just for you to get an idea of what I was talking about before, of how you, you know, the bakery is a prototype of something that people can see. It's a real-term manifestation within a crack, within a gap, that people can interact with. We do the same now for the green space outside, where we build things together and we prototype how to use that space. Always also looking at financial viability, of course, but also as many other things that bring people together. And always with a little bit of Shazam, because we need a little bit of Shazam. We need a little bit of like special. You come into a space and you feel this is special, and we made that, and it's Shazam. And finally, I think for me, what is the big question within a neighborhood like that, and within this whole development that we're doing, and all of us are involved in and implicit in, is a lot of people now say to us, we are moving to the area, we're buying a house in the area because of Homebaked. And it makes me shiver, it makes me sick. I'm like, we're becoming agents of gentrification in some way. So we are now in this system that we're working in, pushing the housing prices up, or will at some point, in an area that has always been affordable. So how can we co-own as much, or take as much of the land off the speculative market, while we still can in an area where you still can, because it doesn't cost anything at the moment, you know, so that we can make it long-term affordable, and we can develop, which we all want to, we really want to develop without displacing more people. Thank you.
Excellent.